So before I actually get started with my talk, this is a ThinkPad T590 running Arca OS 5.1.1 natively in UEFI mode. You know, UEFI mode is sort of a misnomer. It's not really a mode. It's running the UEFI firmware that's in the machine, but it's not using any kind of traditional BIOS emulation. So there's no compatibility support module active in the BIOS. So it boots UEFI. It recognizes, although there's 16 gigabytes of RAM installed in here, it recognizes 1.7 gigabytes of system memory for OS2 available.
And the HDMI port works.
And the HDMI port works. Now, it works. Let's qualify that. I'm using Panorama. Remember, the Panorama is a VISA driver. Driver, again, is a misnomer. So I cannot software switch between the HDMI port and the internal display. But in the BIOS, I can set the boot display to HDMI, and that's, so I have, my screen here is black.
Oh, that's handy.
Okay, so,
Say that one more time.
okay, so because I'm using Panorama, and Panorama is not a video driver, but is a VISA bus. Thank you, David would give me the right word to use. I have no direct control over screen output functions because that's not part of the VISA specification. That's a hardware specific thing. So unlike Snap, where you have support for specific chipsets, and with support for a specific chipset, you can toggle features of that chipset using the Snap driver. Panorama has no facility for doing that. So because I was able in BIOS setup to say I want my boot display device to be HDMI external, the system booted up to HDMI. My internal display is blank. There's no both option.
I think you just fixed the problem I have with my laptop. Because I have the same issue.
So what I'll need to do later on is I'll need to switch it back so I can actually work on the machine again. But I wasn't sure how the external video was going to work. This is the first time I'm doing a presentation on this machine. So I'm sort of like walking the tightrope without my net because I've been using my T43 for almost 20 years now. All of my Warpstock presentations have been on my T43 using Snap, and it's been so comfortable to just press the button and there's the screen. So this is a new experience for me. But I really, really, really like this machine, this T590. It's a very sweet running machine. And essentially, everything works in the machine. Audio works, the video works. The wired Ethernet works. I have a wireless bridge that I use for Wi-Fi. And with the new version of A-Mouse that David has almost completely rewritten, the track point actually behaves the way we expect a track point to behave. So I no longer have to use the IBM mouse, single mouse driver on a ThinkPad. So this machine is fairly well supported running UEFI. This machine will not boot traditional mode. If I turn on the CSM, the hardware is not compatible. But UEFI, because of the Arca compatibility system, ANCS, I can just boot this machine up and it boots beautifully and runs.
I was thinking about this because my machine also has a.
I just use the microphone. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
My talk has actually begun. This is the preamble.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Okay, so I can ask a real question. My machine which is a Claymore, which does all the same stuff.
Mhm.
The only thing that doesn't work is the HDMI port in Arca OS. If I use Ubuntu or I use Windows,
Mhm.
the port does work. What is missing?
Okay. How do you use the HDMI port in those operating systems?
I just plug in the cable, I don't have to switch anything, and it is available.
Okay.
For example, to the beamer.
Right. I get that. In the system BIOS, do you have the ability to make the HDMI port your primary video?
As far as I know, no.
Then the answer is it's not going to work. Here's the reason why. Those other operating systems have video drivers which actually drive the hardware and enable all the outputs. Panorama has no ability to do that. Now, when can that change? Arkanoe licensed the source code to Snap from Alt Richmond, who purchased the source code from SciTech. So we have the Snap source code, and if we get an enterprising developer or two who wants to dig into the Snap code and write a driver, because each video chip has its own separate driver that is dropped into the Snap code, and when Snap is recompiled, we magically support that new chip. But you need to obviously have all of the capabilities of the chip and how to address the chip and how to tell the chip to zoom the display, how to tell the chip that you want to do, how to tell the chip that you want to toggle an output on or off. If someone would write a driver for that video chip, we would gladly recompile Snap and come out with a new version to support that chip. That is what's required. We cannot add that functionality to Panorama because Panorama is a VISA component. So that's what's missing, is an actual video driver for your hardware. The only way I was able to do this is because the BIOS allowed me to direct my output through the HDMI port. Otherwise, I could have pressed any combination of buttons on the keyboard I wanted, and I would still be pressing and wondering why it wasn't working. Sandra, you have a question? You want to hand the microphone back?
You might have luck if you're really fast at pressing some of those function toggles to switch
Before the system boots up.
That's really in the very first second where the system UEFI
Assuming that the UEFI BIOS
supports those key
supports
presses.
that switching, you might be able to do the switching before Arca OS takes over and boots up. You can try that. We should probably try that.
I will try it.
Because if it works, then I see a wiki entry in my future.
Yes, but even on the ThinkPads, it's sometimes tricky. You can set your device to for example, a display port or something like else, or the VGA port, and the system will not boot the next time to that port. It still is on the internal display. That
If the port isn't connected.
you have, yes, it's connected.
Oh.
You have to press Control Alt Del in that moment, and then it switches over and reboots with an external really enabled.
Interesting. Okay.
So
I
I
didn't
could-
have to do that on this machine.
Yes,
I just
detected
told it-
on X250 and T430, which worked this way.
Interesting. Okay.
Just a quick note. If that what you were describing happens on a UEFI machine, it's confirmed UEFI protocol, because when you just use UEFI GOP, that's the UEFI equivalent of a video BIOS, just a frame address. But what you saw with my laptop yesterday is that, and what you have there, is that it looks for a primary device. And that's what UEFI does. It looks for a primary device. So the moment that as on my laptop, you close the screen and it looks to the other port, then the firmware picks it up and shifts it over.
Well, I might have tried that. Perhaps if I would have left it selected to my internal display but left the lid closed.
It's all up.
Because I do not have this set to suspend when the lid is closed.
It's all up on how they implemented the firmware. It's up to the vendor.
Right.
So
I need to experiment to see that.
one other bold thing that you could do that wouldn't maybe make Snap a requirement, because getting Snap to work in a UEFI environment might open up a whole caveat of other worms, but that's a different discussion.
That's a completely separate.
But one thing that might work is if somebody could figure out per chipset of family which I/O ports you could toggle to kick the video over to another port, because that's effectively what also happens. Somewhere a bit is toggled and says flip it over to another port. So that might be.
That's a question for Dixie.
Yeah.
And I will just mention this because we were just talking about suspend. Everyone in here knows that suspend is evil, right? Or I should say more accurately, resume is evil. Suspend is okay, but coming back is. Don't open a ticket, please. If you suspend and your system doesn't resume, please don't open a ticket. That's all bets are off. If it works for you, great. And if you're brave enough to try it, great. But if you have a long check disk in your future as a result, please don't open a ticket. Okay, so we should probably get started with the actual presentation here. So let's talk for a minute about when I say how to update or upgrade, what I mean is how do you get the software to update or upgrade your machine from 5.0 or 5.1 to 5.11, because there seems to be some confusion surrounding this point based upon my observation of what activity we've had going on in the Arkanoe store, what people are buying to upgrade their machines. And remember this, we are very, very customer oriented. If you use our contact page, or you send us an email to sales@arkanoe.com, and you say, I think I bought the wrong thing, I didn't need X, Y, or Z, we are very happy to refund your money. We don't need to take anyone's money arbitrarily. That's not our company paradigm. So we're very happy to make things right, however we can do that for you. But I see a lot of people ordering probably more stuff than they really need to order. And so I just thought I would do a quick rundown as to how this process should work. So if your 5.1 support is current, you've got an active subscription, you renewed it running 5.10, you can just log into your portal, request a new ISO, so the language ISO you want to download, and you have a German ISO. That's fine with us. Let's say you have 5.1 English and you say, I just want to upgrade what I have. When I get a new machine, I'll reinstall in German. Fine. So just select your new ISO and select English for your ISO. Get your English ISO and update your 5.10 to 5.11 from that English 5.11 ISO. When you get your new machine, log back in, tell it you want a new ISO, select German, download your ISO, and install your 511 German on your new machine. Remember, though, that you may only have as many active installations of Arca OS as you have licensed. So when you get a new machine, that means that your old machine is going to be decommissioned. If your has expired, all you need to do is renew your support. If you haven't been expired too long, you're still going to own, you just won't get any renewal discounts. 5.1 support pricing went up, so 5.1 support is normally $70 a year with a 10% early renewal discount. What do we consider early renewal? All the way up to the date of your expiration. That's early renewal. After that point, you lose the 10% discount. It's $70 for, do you remember how many months we go before we consider the renewal late? Is it 6 months? I think it's 6 months. After that period, then you've got to pay a premium to renew. It's still less than buying a new license. We much prefer it if you do that than consume another IBM license. Because when you buy a new license, you are consuming one of our IBM licenses, so that costs our company money. But the flip side is, when you renew late, instead of just getting the remaining time on that annual period, you have a new year anniversary starting from that point when you renew. So, let's say that your support expired in March of this year, March 1st. And you thought, well, there's nothing really that I want. I don't want to download any new software. Okay. Oh, I'm getting too hot for the mic. Sorry. I knew I was missing my wife. Now I know where she is. I don't want any new software. I'm fine the way it is. And you let your subscription lapse. And then in July, you realize, oh, they are still writing new software at Arcanoe. I had no idea. And they've updated the Multimac driver for my network card. I'd better renew my subscription. So you renew your subscription. Well, when you renew, now you're going to pay $70 instead of getting your 10% early renewal discount. And you're only going to get up until next March on that subscription. If you wait 6 months to renew, you'll have to pay a premium on that renewal, but you'll get a whole year from that point forward. Okay? We try to be fair about this stuff. But our business model is a hybrid licensing and subscription model, so we need to encourage people to renew their subscriptions because we have ongoing expenses every month. So, if it's expired, renew, request your new ISO, and go. So if you have 5.0 and you have never upgraded to 5.1, because remember, semantically, we consider it a difference when you are at 5.0 and you want to go to a 5.1 release, that's an upgrade. When you're already on a 5.1 release and you want to go to a newer 5.1 release, that's an update. So if your 5.0 support is current and you finally decided, all right, I'm going to pull the trigger on this and I'm going to upgrade my Arca OS to the 5.1 version. I'm getting a new machine. I need UEFI support. There's no UEFI support in 5.0. Now's the time. If your 5.0 support is current, you pay a discounted rate for a personal license is $59. Your 5.0 support and your 5.0 license ends at that point, and you have a 5.1 license. So any updates that are released for 5.0 after that point, you are not entitled to download. There are a lot of updates that are common to both 5.0 and 5.1. Just last night, we released Dynamic Icons 256, which is common to both 5.0 and 5.1. So you'll get that with your 5.1 updates at that point, because when you upgrade your Arca OS subscription, you are entitled to all of the new updates. But something that was only shipped in 5.0, you won't get updates for that anymore. And we assume that you have decommissioned that 5.0 license because you still only have one Arca OS license. You have just converted it from 5.0 to 5.1. Now, let's say that your 5.0 support has expired because, again, I don't need any new software. Everything's running fine on my 2006 system, and I bought my Arca OS license. I never needed to upgrade it. I never needed to update it. I let it lapse. All right, no problem. You do not have to pay a late renewal fee of your 5.0 support in order to upgrade to 5.1. All you need to do is pay a little bit more for your upgrade. So instead of $59, it's $89. And now you have a fresh 5.1 license, 5.1.1 now, with 6 months of support for a personal license, 12 months of support for a commercial license. The commercial upgrade is more than $89. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but personal licenses, $59 with existing 5.0 support, $89 with expired 5.0 support. And again, the same thing happens. Your 5.0 support is gone. Your license for 5.0 is gone. It's now a 5.1 license. We have had issues in the store where the system has, for some reason or other, not allowed the license upgrade without a renewal, a late renewal of the 5.0 support. If that happens to you, either don't go through with the sale and send us an email and let us know, or go through with the sale and let us know and we'll square up with you. I mean, yeah, exactly. That's not a problem for us. We're not looking to take extra money. But I wanted to take a few minutes just to go over this because looking at some of the things that go on in the store, I also see people purchasing the OS2 drivers and software subscription on top of renewing Arca OS support. And I wonder, do these people really still have Warp 4 and Ecom Station systems running, or do they think that they need a drivers and software subscription on top of the Arca OS subscription? The answer is you don't. You only need the OS2 drivers and software subscription if you have a non-Arca OS installation or multiple non-Arca OS installations running. Other than that, all you need is Arca OS support for as many Arca OS installations as you actually have. Speaking of different subscriptions, as I just said, you don't need different subscriptions unless you have 5.0 Arca OS and some 5.1, so you've purchased additional licenses for 5.1. You have a 5.0 system, you want to add a new system, but you don't want to add a new system. You can't purchase a personal 5.0 license anymore. So if you want a new system, you have to purchase a 5.1 license, but you want to still have availability of updates for the 5.0 system that you haven't decommissioned. Then you need multiple subscriptions because you have two different versions of Arca OS, two different installations. You don't need different subscriptions unless you're maintaining Warp 4 and or ECS, as I said before, in addition to your Arca OS installations. In that case, you need the drivers and software subscription if you're going to install multi-Mac drivers on your ECS system to keep it running. Because the Arca OS support and maintenance subscription only includes a license to run that software on Arca OS. If you're going to run that software on Warp 4 or on ECS, you need to have the drivers and software subscription, which provides you the license to run the software on those platforms. And if you're maintaining different editions, this doesn't usually happen, but it can. Let's say you have a small office and you have 5 commercial licenses in your office, and you have 1 commercial license at home. Well, then you're going to need 5 commercial support and maintenance subscriptions for the office machines, and you're going to need 1 personal support and maintenance subscription for your system at home. 1 subscription, 1 license, always 1-to-1. So here's the 5.1 release plan. As we know, 5.1.1 is the current release in English, German, Russian, and Spanish, or Spanish and Russian. 5.1.2 is in development right now. We do not anticipate as long a wait for 5.1.2 as there was for 5.1.1. With regard to the question of when we should have dropped German, should we have done that with 5.07 or 5.08? There was a tremendous amount of work to be done in the store to make additional languages available that was not there for 5.0, and it actually delayed the 5.1 release. As 5.1.0 release, when we were getting the 2 different versions to be available, and then we had more work to do for getting 5.1.1 done so we could select different languages. So there's a lot of other stuff besides the operating system itself that's required just to get the ISOs built and out to customers. But we don't anticipate such a wait for 5.1.2. We have a few targeted updates on our list, and our hope is to get 5.1.2 out before the end of this year. And we have plans for 5.1.3 going forward. At some point, we'll switch to 5.2. I don't know when. We have no specific calendar that says when 5.1.3 is supposed to come out or when 5.2 will come out. Main points for 5.1.2. Better support for UEFI. We still have systems that boot inconsistently, don't boot at all. More research is required, and that research is ongoing. So we're still working on that. There will be improvements to that. And because of the way the Arca compatibility system, which allows us to boot on UEFI, is distributed, that's an ISO upgrade. We don't make that available as a package that you can simply install on an existing 5.1.1 system. So that will be a new ISO that you'll need to download. We are looking at updating Samba 4. Right now, we're looking at 4.15.13 and bringing the Samba server up to the same level as the client. A lot of the delay with this has been the debate about whether we're going to continue shipping the Simple Samba Configuration Center, or we're going to replace that GUI with something else, or whether we're not going to have a GUI at all. And I think right now we're looking at continuing to ship the Simple Samba configuration center and just upgrade the Samba server components and remove the older Samba server that's in that warp-in package for a Simple Samba configuration center. But the goal is to get the client and server at the same level, same release level. As usual, latest driver, installer, and utility updates. We continue to refine the installation process. Updated VNC and Lucide. We have a newer Lucide available. We haven't released 1.5.5 yet, but it's coming.
Well,
1.5.
you have.
Yeah, 1.5.1. We have 1.5.0 in Arca OS 5.1.1, but we have one step newer release of Lucide that's ready to come out.
Yeah.
We've just been through an extended beta test period with it works fine for me. So, I have a new version of VNC from Andre that I need to build the 686 packages for. Andre builds for Pentium 4, but the i686 libraries will not work with that, so I have to recompile for i686. And Andre is not set up to do that, so that falls to me to build the i686 versions. So I wait for him to update the source code, provide the Pentium 4 builds, then I do the i686 build for each language, because each language of VNC is a different package. And then I test those packages to make sure that they do behave as the Pentium 4 version behaves, because the build process still works much more consistently for Andre than it does for me. But there is a new VNC version that's in the pipeline. If you go to Andre's site, OS2Digi, you'll find his latest VNC packages there for Pentium 4. Additional refinements to the existing languages that we have out, because just because we release a language doesn't mean the language is finished. It's not done until the translator says, that's it, there's no more to do. And we are a long way away from that stage for any language. But there are additional things that will be updated for existing languages as we do one release after another. We do not have a specific plan to release individual components along the way just for language updates, but if there's something egregious that needs to be addressed, then we may make components available. And certainly when X Workplace drops in its different languages, all of those languages are available. And potential new NLVs, as Alex mentioned before. French and Italian are getting there. I mean, they're not ready for prime time yet, which is why they didn't come out in 5.1.1. We have a new French translator I have to onboard, and that's on me. I'm running late getting that done because it's a lot of administrivia on my part. I've got to set him up with access. I've got to show him where all the stuff is, where all the Mantis tickets are, highlight specific Mantis tickets that he should review. And yes, it's in an email template, and yes, it's all there, but I just don't trust myself, so I have to read through it all before I just blindly send it off. So he's waiting in the wings to be onboarded to pick up on a lot of Guillaume's work. And I need to catch up to my friend Guillaume because I haven't heard from him in a while. I'm a little concerned that he's...
Me neither.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about him. So it's one of the things that I keep reminding myself I need to do is try to contact him. Ongoing development. So those were the main points that we wanted to touch on in the 5.1.2 release. But work that continues that may find its way into 5.1.2, or it may be later in the 5.1 cycle or later than that, is continuing refinements to the Archinoid compatibility system so that we can boot on more systems and boot more consistently. Continuing work for new network drivers. David continues his work on the IGC driver. That's for the Intel 2.5 gigabit Ethernet adapters. From a driver perspective, the really is immaterial. It's a chipset. But apparently the chipset is much more involved in the MMIGC driver than in other drivers. So that work is taking a lot of effort, but it's happening. Wi-Fi is also happening, but Wi-Fi is also a heavy lift. And there are ways around the Wi-Fi problem with Ethernet bridges. I brought a bridge device with me. It works beautifully. And I don't even have to use the hotel Wi-Fi. I turn data on my phone, and I just tether to my phone, and I'm good. I'm off. I'm happy. Doesn't matter to me. So the thing lays on the desk. I don't even pay attention to it. But we know that a lot of people have been clamoring for Wi-Fi drivers. Wi-Fi is in the pipeline, but again, it's a heavy lift. It's going to take some time. Remember how long it took us to get USB 3, and now USB 3 is really nice and stable. So everyone be patient. Improved DOS and WinOS 2 support, including audio solutions, which means work is continuing on DT Audio, which was formerly known as DTA, the Digital Transfer Agent, which allows WinOS 2 audio to flow to UniAud so that you get sound in your WinOS 2 sessions, which rolls me back for a minute to the discussion of MIDI before. MIDI is musical instrument digital interface. So MIDI is actually an interface specification. It's not a file, not a sound format. The patches are instrument files. So you have a patch for a particular instrument. Let's say a detuned piano. That's one particular patch. So the MIDI file will call for a detuned piano to be played to play these notes. So you need the patch, which is normally fed to an MPU 401 chip on an audio card. The problem is modern systems no longer ship with MIDI chips in them to play those patch files and synthesize those instruments. What MIDI does is it's a software MIDI player. So it synthesizes the synthesized instruments. So a lot of DOS and WinOS 2 and Windows games, Windows 3.1 games, are written with MIDI soundtracks in the background for background music and what have you. All of this stuff, this audio support here and the Timidity player, it's all part and parcel of getting better DOS and WinOS 2 sound support, including MIDI support for those games, to get a better user experience for playing those games. That work is continuing, which means the DT Audio driver, which gets us WinOS 2 sound into UniAud, and then a virtual Sound Blaster driver, which gets us the equivalent of a Sound Blaster 16 for DOS sessions, routed through the same way, through DT audio and then into UniAud. Interim updates. So what are we going to release in between 5.1 and 5.12? Rework dynamic icons, which is that release 2.5.6 that we dropped last night. Rich put a tremendous amount of effort in this. A huge rewrite in, I don't know if it's a majority of the code, but a tremendous portion of the dynamic icons code. The memory footprint is greatly reduced. Finally, icon view and tree view have their own settings pages in the settings notebook, and you can have different icon sizes in tree view and in icon view. And we only cache one image. We don't have to cache multiple images for the different sizes that you want for this, that, and the other. So it's a tremendous amount of work, but it has really, really paid off. We had no idea when we entered into our agreement with Echo Software to license Sunny Icons, which is essentially the basis for dynamic icons. We had no idea how popular that little piece of software was going to be. But all these new systems are coming out, and they've got these ridiculously high resolution displays on them. And all of a sudden, your 32 by 32 icons are like, what? What is that? I can't, what? Now you can scale them up and scale them down, and I had no idea. Why? Because I use a T43 from 2006. 1400 by 1024. By 1050. Everything looks beautiful to me. Really, there's a world out there that's got higher resolution than that? Who knew? So that's released as an interim update. That's multilingual, by the way, in one package. So you only have to download the one package. You get the language. What's that?
Free of charge.
Free of charge, yes. With a subscription. It's free of charge. More multi-Mac driver updates and support for newer chips. As I said, David is working on the MMIGC chip. And of course, there are always updates to the existing chips as the drivers are updated in FreeBSD. David looks to see what the updates are. If they're of any value to us, he will drop the new driver code into multi-Mac and build a new multi-Mac release for that. Continuing maintenance on ACPI. When I say updates to ACPI, it's really maintenance because David keeps up with the ACPI CA spec, drops that new code into there, builds a new ACPI driver for us. Speak, please.
I have a microphone.
He's got one.
You hear me? Okay. Recently, Intel and I believe AMD have stopped with, what do we call it, the parallel processing per core.
Multi-threading.
No, not multi-threading. Hyper-threading. Do we know if that's going to have any effect on ACPI, or are we covered?
I do not know if that will have any effect on ACPI, but as you know, we don't necessarily recommend enabling hyper-threading.
Agreed. But
certain machines don't allow you to turn it off.
Yeah. As I understood it,
Mm-hmm.
the chip now has an extra physical core, whereas previously it was hyper-threading. So effectively, you would say this should be better for us.
You would think, yes,
But
because you don't have one chip
no.
that's trying to fake another core.
Have we been able to do any testing on that at all? You know?
I do not know. I haven't tested it myself at all, and I don't know if David has tested that.
I'm not sure when the introduction was. I don't know if anybody knows when the new chips came out or are coming out.
We support a lot of cores in our kernel.
Those not tell how many because that's a question for tomorrow.
But my guess would, if I were to just guess off the top of my head, I would say that it shouldn't affect any of our stuff at all, but the machine should behave better and perform better.
Okay.
That's certainly. Improvements to USB, really what that means is perhaps better support for some chipsets. There are some chipsets that are just a little on the
Iffy side.
they're a little funny. So David works to improve that support. A-Mouse, as I say, his work on A-Mouse has been absolutely stellar. The code is so much better than what we had when we began. And that will continue as we find and enhance support for various systems. Updates to the updater. So when you run the 5.1.0 to 5.1.1 update, the process is fairly smooth. You boot into the installer, and then it presents you with a list of candidate partitions where it detects that you're running a version of Arca OS that can be upgraded or updated to the latest version. And then it just goes. So we're adding some additional checking for, or I should say validation of things so that we don't have surprises along the way. Obviously, we always want to avoid breaking the system. You have a running machine, it's running 5.1.0. The last report I ever want to read is, I put in my 5.1.1 USB stick, and now my machine won't boot. There you go. There you go. So we're looking at, and we get very few of those reports, but weird things do happen, and so we continue to look to refine the process. Because sometimes you'll have a machine that boots and runs just fine, but the installer, the IBM installer, not the Arca OS components of the installer, but the base IBM installer, which we still run during updates, has some very stringent requirements, shall we say. And sometimes it will come across a configuration in a file that it just says, that's not right, and just errors out. And the error is something like, something not right was encountered. 1604, and it just leaves you there. It's like, okay, now what? And then the customer says, I got a 1604 error. Congratulations. Congratulations. So you had an error that was not any other type of error. Yes, but no, that's what you had. You had an error that wasn't any other type of error. Can you fix it? I don't know, because I don't know what error it was. So we're looking to try to reduce the number of those occurrences. There are very few of them, but there are some, and some of them that we can address by better validating the files before we feed them to the IBM installer, and then it falls on its face.
That does happen with log packages.
The ability to replace files with different names. Now, there are a couple things that Alex and I went over with regard to the installer and the update process in terms of, this is the Bible. The installer does not delete files. Well, first of all, the installer does not break something that's already working. The installer does not delete files. If we replace a component in a new version of Arca OS, we do not remove the existing component that was installed by the last version of Arca OS. So for instance, we no longer install PMD Calc. But if PMD Calc is already installed on the system, we don't touch it. We don't remove it I use PMD Calc every day. That's my desktop calculator. My brother still works with a paper tape on his calculator, and he's got paper tape. It's like our dad's office. I mean, the paper tape is just like confetti. I don't use that. I use PMD Calc with a tape in PMD Calc. That's my desktop calculator. I don't want that uninstalled. So these are basic things basic terms that we decided on with the installer. However, what we've discovered is there are certain instances where we may move something to a different place on the disk. With a new release of Arca OS, we want to move the existing files from point A over to point B. Or let's say we have a README file and we're installing in Spanish, and README is Leame. And so we want to replace that file name because it really should be a localized file name. So we break the rules and we remove the old version and we replace that file. Even if the content is exactly the same, we essentially, it looks like we've renamed the file, but we put down the latest version of the file with the new name. So that's now in the installer. So when you install the next version of Arca OS, there may be some files in your language that have localized names on them now that didn't before. Better logging for process. Remember what I said about the validation thing? So sometimes when we're finding these weird issues and we have to go back and figure out, okay, we got a 1604 error in the IBM installer, which means that something went wrong. Maybe something leading up to that is what caused it to run off the rails at that point. So we need better logging of what happened leading up to that something went wrong failure. So we are working to improve that part of the process. Post 512, all right, so these are just, this is the scratch board. Go ahead, Alex.
Good example. Sometimes we see an error report where the description of the error is the system reports that it failed to update config.sys. That is usually not the actual error. The actual error is usually that config.sys does not exist because the base operating system install failed.
Yes. So there was no config.sys that ever was in that place. So naturally, updating.
Quite.
The IBM installer is not. It's not very flexible. It's not very intuitive. Is really the word. It's, IBM envisioned a certain number of installation failure modes, and beyond that, they said, well, someone else's problem, No matter where I go, no matter how many events at which I speak, when I get to interact with people, the one thing that always comes back to me is you guys have the absolute best OS2 install process I've ever experienced in my entire life since I started using OS2 and OS2 1.1. And we aim to make it better. I mean, early on, I think we all sort of agree that you only get one chance to make a first impression. And if the operating system is a real pain to get installed, you're really not going to look forward to the next reboot after the install. But if the installation process runs smoothly, and it seems like the people behind the operating system put a lot of time and effort to make that happen, you'll be much more enthused about running the product after the install. Sandra, you have a question. You need a microphone.
Yes, one experience we had with physical DVDs for installation, and used image for a Linux version and the inner image of ArcOS. The files on ArcOS are better arranged so that they're really mostly called in order, so there's not a lot of head movement on the DVD. And the latest installation, it got a lot slower because it was so many movement required. That's a really good example how you did.
Well, I
good
can.
expression.
I have to credit Alex with that because he is our resident organizational expert.
Okay.
If I had to come up with one word to describe my good friend Alex, it would be organized. Alex starts writing his presentations a month in advance before a Warpstock event, rehearses them, refines them, rewrites them, requests comments on them. I'm almost like Roderick. See, Roderick is in there writing his presentation right now. You know? My dad used to tell me stories about when he was in school and he'd be outside class working his homework out from the night before going in to turn it in. Well, that's, usually I'm on the plane doing this, right? But that organization, that's Alex. Seriously. Yes, take a round of applause. You deserve it. You deserve it.
But I also had the experience some file dates seems to have been touched in some processes so that they are newer than they really are. And then comes an updated version where these additional files are absolutely the same and they have a backdate which is more correct than the oral file. And so
yes.
You have to, okay, you have this new version. Do I have to overwrite things with these files which are older than the existing files?
This is a particular issue with warp-in packages, where warp-in will warn you that the file installed is newer than the one that's in the package. And I discussed this with Paul Ratcliffe, who maintains warp-in. And Paul said to me, it's the packager's responsibility to set the file dates on the files in the warp-in archive as to how they are supposed to be. It is not warp-in's responsibility to ensure that the packages, exactly. So yes, some things, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I know why that happens. It happens because sometimes we repackage a warp-in, and when we repackage it, the files get touched. So we end up with newer files, and then the update comes out. We don't have to repackage the update, and the file is really the same file that we already installed, but it hasn't been touched, so its date is older than the one we already installed. That's an excellent observation. It's an observation. And it's something that sticks in my mind whenever I see it, but I never, ever, ever jot it down to remember that, because typically I'm the one who's repackaging the warp-ins, and I take full responsibility for touching the file dates when I shouldn't.
Probably a Unix component which updates the file date on copy is...
See, when you install an RPM, RPMs don't care about dates.
Yes.
Yeah, if something touches the extended attributes, I believe that will update the file date.
That's right, exactly.
And guess what? A lot of the klibc apps do. They write GID and mode and stuff, extended attributes to every file they touch. And another big source of this is the HPFS 386 file system, if anybody uses that. Because every time you open a folder in the workplace shell on an HPFS 386 file system, it will touch every single file. That is the single biggest reason why I stopped using HPFS 386. And it does it because it touches all the EAs when it refreshes the folder.
When I do the initial ISO build for a release. Because when we do a release, I actually run a manual build to create the ISO, then we extract the contents of the ISO to the build server. So one of our procedures is to ensure that we have no extraneous extended attributes in the build tree that might cause us problems somewhere along the line. So I clean all that stuff up. Sometimes things get touched, and it's not even as a result of my manually repackaging a warping or something. It happens in the course of doing that. Because you'll find that files where you had EAs and the EAs are removed are now touched.
I'll talk about that tomorrow.
Okay.
Instead of installing from a USB stick, is it possible to install the ISO from a hard disk partition?
It is possible to install the ISO from a hard disk partition if you're installing in traditional BIOS mode. You can't do a UEFI install from a hard disk yet.
That answers my question. Thanks.
It's on the RFE list, but it's way down the list because very few of us do hard disk installs. I do them all the time for testing because it's faster for me that way. Go ahead,
I
Keith.
know on my system it is theoretically possible because in the BIOS UEFI it says, would you like to use this hard disk as the source? I've never tried it, so.
I don't know if it will boot that way. You know, we create a hybrid ISO. It's a pretty interesting concept, but the ISO will boot on a UEFI system and it will boot on a traditional BIOS system. When you install from a hard disk, the hard disk is almost the same as a USB stick install. On a USB stick, we have two partitions. We have the ESP for the USB stick, and then we have the partition for the Arca OS files themselves and the ISO in a separate directory under that. When you do a hard disk install, you just get that one partition. You don't get two partitions on the hard disk. So I don't know if it will boot that way without the UEFI partition being present. But it's one of those things that we want to, at some point, we're going to want to enable that. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in a minute is the ability to I completely lost my train of thought. It had to do with installing. It was a GUI for building the USB boot stick. Because we've discovered that our current procedure no longer works for older versions of Windows. Pre-Windows 10, is it? Yeah, pre-Windows 10. It's really interesting about the way the stick is created and the partitions that are recognized on the stick. And we want a GUI for that stuff anyway, so hopefully we can address all those issues in a GUI environment that are more difficult to do with the command line for people, because the instructions are already this long for building the stick. I'd have to make them like that long to. So, right, I talked about the new Multimac driver. That's still on the way. Let me go backwards. This is a whole page to write. So, stick creation GUI, right? When I say cross-platform consistent, it should look and function essentially the same on Mac as on Linux as on Windows. On OS 2, you shouldn't need it. That problem on Windows creating the stick does not exist on OS 2. You can use OS 2 2.0 and create an Arca OS USB boot stick. But Windows 7 can't do it. What, you can't do it under Windows 2? OS 2 2.0? Oh, that's true. You need to have a USB stack.
Probably depends on OS2 LVM, DND, and the OS2 desktop stuff because they're supporting there for removable.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, it's a can of worms.
You know, we.
I'll have to test it. I'll probably run out the door.
You know, we have a product, the S390 backup solution, that is for the control station on an IBM mini mid-range system. The OS2 control station that has an array, a disk array in it. The disk array is not LVM. What our solution allows you to do is it supports both LVM and non-LVM drives. So you can run FDisk and LVM if you need to, and you can make backups to USB sticks from the array. So it's a pretty interesting concept. I've never seen an OS2 version prior to that would work with both LVM partitioned media and non-LVM partitioned media and recognize the non-LVM partitioned media. But we have a product that does that. One of the things on Alex's wish list is a new rewritten printer manager, as long as he's not the one to rewrite it. Yeah. So that's still on the internal wish list. We'll see where that goes.
Are you talking about cups or the IBM print manager?
Both.
May I give a wish list on the cups that you have a sort possibility? Because
I know that's one of your pet peeves, because the list of cups printers keeps growing and growing. We hear you loud and clear.
Filter by vendor.
Yeah, do you know how many HP versions there are?
Well, I wrote the GUI, so I have a pretty good idea.
Do we not have is there no search facility in the GUI? Maybe not.
I mean, it basically just splits it up by manufacturer name.
By manufacturer
And that's
name,
it. Yeah, and then with HP, you tend to go down. And I mean, if you could just sort on the number, it would be fantastic.
The fun part about HP is, okay, so I have a color LaserJet. Is it listed as an HP LaserJet color or an HP color LaserJet?
I know.
So you go down through all the lists. No, that's not it. That's not it. And then it says Pro. Oh, that's the one. The desktop notebook background page, it's terribly broken. It has, if you have JPEGs for your background images, it doubles them up.
Never had it.
Really?
It's
Never
random.
Seen that?
It happens on some systems and it doesn't happen on others. And I've seen it as far back as Warp 3.
Yeah, it's a bizarre bug. So we have plans. It will probably make its way into X Workplace. I'm trying to convince Rich that that's the next thing that he should think about doing, and it would allow for selecting additional types of background images, and it would.
Do they have a browse function?
A browse function would be nice, so you can preview the image before you select it and say, yes, that's the wallpaper. Oh, that's not the wallpaper I want. And a randomizer, so you can change wallpapers at random if you want. Eye candy stuff, because some people like that. As I mentioned, the MMIGC driver, and there are others, but Dave is focused on that one right now, as far as I know. People ask me, how do you exist using CMonkey 235 today? Because I use Squid Proxy chained to Privoxy, And there are a lot of sites that will not open in our latest Firefox or SeaMonkey that open just fine for me. And I wonder, why is everyone complaining? Because Squid is handling the connection for me. I'm proxying it. And Privoxy filters out a bunch of stuff. So I need to do a new build of Privoxy that's SSL enabled. The version we have now is missing the Wolf TLS library. I started building that and I ran into some issues with some other pieces, so I need to foist that off to one of my buds. I'll give Paul a ring and say, can you try to build this thing for me, because I need it for Privoxy. At some point, I want to put in a unified installation package to do the chained installation of Squid and Privoxy to allow that. It better anonymizes your web activity. And as I say, it will get us a little bit more life out of our browsers. An updated Clock 01 sys. David is still thinking about that. Because there are some modern timers that our existing Clock 01 sys just doesn't know how to handle. Support for touchpad devices using I2C bus. That's also in the consideration phase. Consideration phase is not quite up to the planning stage yet. Consideration phase is gathering information on the bus and trying to figure out what's going to be necessary in order to do it. Then we move to the planning stage, which is, okay, we've decided to do it, how are we going to get there from here? There are certain, I was going to say ThinkPads. There aren't, as far as I know, ThinkPads this way, but there are notebooks, more and more of them, that are using I2C for the touchpad. So the mouse driver can't access it at all. We don't see the touchpad at all because it's on the I2C bus, and we have no driver for the I2C bus. So David's looking at that. Wireless drivers, right? Everyone knows WLAN is Wi-Fi, right? There's wireless drivers. Yes, it's just a heavy lift to get there. So until we get there, there are workarounds. And we can push the workarounds even farther out. For instance, if you have a system that only has USB on it and it doesn't have an RJ45 jack, you could theoretically, for now, use a wired USB Ethernet dongle, because we support several of those. And you could use one of those bridge devices connected to that dongle that I use. And that way you essentially get USB Wi-Fi. Okay? But that work is ongoing. And it's very slow and unrewarding. It's an uphill slog. There's absolutely no sense of accomplishment along the way until it finally is able to move data. And David isn't there yet.
Well, actually, this is a very quite. This is quite important since more and more newer systems lack a physical LAN port.
That's why, as I say, we do support USB Ethernet dongles. They're not expensive. They'll at least get you a LAN port that way. And then you can connect a bridge device if you need Wi-Fi. So it's a workaround. Our philosophy has always been, if the system doesn't boot, it doesn't matter what devices we support. So we need to make the system boot first. Once it boots, we need to be able to see the screen. We need to be able to access the keyboard. And we need to have some way of moving the pointer around. Whether it's the built-in trackpad, or in the case of an I2C system, that's not going to work. But we have a USB device for the pointer, at least. So that's going to work. Then we can start dealing with the fancy stuff. So there you have it. DT audio I talked about before and the virtual sound blaster, that work is actually sort of underway. I shouldn't say sort of. That work is underway. I don't know when that's going to be to the point of us beta testing it yet. The work on DT audio still needs to get finished, and I don't know the status of the virtual sound blaster driver yet. Roderick needs a microphone, please. Roderick knows more about the status of the virtual sound blaster.
I worked on this. I basically helped John Gow at the time get the DTA together. That was also partly because one of his former employers contracted him to write this driver. The funny part was, at the time when IBM was still selling PCs, they required in their contracts that Windows had Windows 3.1 audio support. So that's why this thing existed in the first place. At the time, Martin Kiewitz was also working on a project called vSound. And this is a VDD that inside of a DOS session emulates a Sound Blaster Pro 16 or a Sound Blaster. It only does audio. And I'm trying to work with the developer to get this up to speed, but somebody has to burn his fingers on writing a VDD. Now, one of the big problems with Sound Blaster cards, as you might remember from your good old DOS days, is that these games are extremely sensitive for timing issues. I can sit down with you for half an hour and describe how blatantly bad the software emulation was of the Sound Blaster support with the Graphis Ultrasound. Long story short, that's what also has to happen in vSound to get Sound Blaster support to work correctly, and that's going to take a couple of tweaks to the subsystem and not just the VDD, but that's a whole...
And that also brings us back to clock01.sys.
And potentially VDMA.sys, because certain DOS games probe the virtual... Everything in the virtual DOS session is virtual. So it talks to it and it needs to give the proper answer. This is also true, for example, for the DOS support in UEFI with VEFI.sys. That also had to have specific tweaks and quirks in it. I helped testing that extensively. And you don't want to know how many nice creative approaches there are on an old DOS system to try and get it to work at high performance. But that now needs to be re-implemented. So there's probably months of work into this. That's my estimate. No cast iron guarantees.
There you have it. So I don't know when that's going to come out, whether it's going to be in 5.1.2. As I say, this is an internal wish list of things. 5.1.2 may be overly aggressive for that. That may be 5.1.3 or something like that. And we want to do a retro gaming release. Once we have the audio working and we have some joystick support, because there's joysticks for DOS games. Remember the old game port thing? So there are a couple different kinds of joysticks, right? So you've got joysticks that use game port, and then there's a device that you can bridge USB to game port joysticks. Then there are USB joysticks. So supporting those, because I don't know who's going to prefer to use which joystick, because analog joysticks feel differently than the USB ones. I'm not a gamer myself. When someone first came to me and said, you know, this would be a great gaming platform for retro gaming, I thought, retro gaming? I'm an accountant. I crunch numbers on this thing, play games on it. Who wants to play games on it? Well, there are a lot of people who want to play games on it. So then when I heard that, I said, oh, well, let's talk about games. Now I'm a gaming accountant. So there are a few things we need to get in order before we do that retro gaming release, but that's where we're headed with the 5.1 release cycle, to that gaming release. and additional NLVs. It might be nice for us to have either simplified and or traditional Chinese.
Is the first one Canadian? CN?
No, China.
So, yes, that's Canadian. We don't have a Canadian version yet. And since they speak a different language up there, America's hat, you know.
Sorry.
Alex is such a good egg. You know, I tease him all the time about stuff like this, and he takes it in because he knows it's meant in the
I was
the best
by
fun.
the way, to see when we were walking around downtown the shop that had color spelled properly.
With a K.
And that's what we have on tap right now. Just in case you didn't think we were doing anything. Someone sent me an email not too long ago and said, "Oh, I didn't know you were still developing that." So what did you think? We were just like selling out like frisbees, like have another CD, you know? I didn't know you were still. Yes, there's a ton of work to be done, and we are still working on stuff. And this is scratching the surface. Believe me, there is so much more stuff that we're working on that's not ready to even discuss out in the open yet because it's not tangible yet. But there's lots of stuff going on. Well, Bluetooth. You know, I was thinking about Bluetooth on the way over. I was actually thinking about Bluetooth, and I thought, what am I going to say if someone asks me about Bluetooth? Here's the thing. We would love to have a Bluetooth stack on Arca OS. If the need should arise, just like we were talking about languages, if we have a commercial enterprise says to us, look, we want to license 1,500 Arca OS stations, but we need Bluetooth support, you better believe we're going to have Bluetooth support. You better believe we're going to have Bluetooth support. So it's not impossible to do, but there has to be a financially motivating reason for us to do it. That's really what it comes down to.
And what about SAS drives?
SAS, SAS.
Yeah.
Serial attached storage. You know, that's on my personal wish list.
7 years ago, in ECS time, I had a client that required that to buy license.
Interesting.
And I spoke with, I think Roderick was already there, and they said the same as you. He said, well, if you pay in advance something, and it's logical, then we can do it. And the client said, yeah, but if I pay in advance, how can you assure me that I will use them and they will be usable? So
good point.
The thing died there. It's
okay.
A pity, but, well.
Understandable. Let's get Roderick another microphone, or he's got one. Okay. Roderick, say something.
There's one problem with SAS. It's not a generic protocol as far as I understand as AHCI or NVMe. There you have a standard. You can write a driver for it, and with our NVMe driver you can take
SAS is vendor specific.
Yeah. So just like with the SCSI card, you need to have something of a thing that talks to the SAS controller to make it work. Now, even if you have the SAS controller working, that's part one. I have no clue what, because I know where you're going. You want to have SAS RAID support probably. Is that the right hunch? Because usually an SAS controller in a server has multiple disks in an array. Otherwise, you could just as well use a laptop. But with an SAS controller, all of the stuff needs to be there that it can talk to the SAS controller.
SAS has essentially replaced SCSI
I know.
in arrays. And so the answer to your question is yes, we can likely do an SAS driver for a specific chipset with a reasonable, I don't want to say guarantee, but a reasonable degree of assuredness that we can get that working on that hardware. If we had a customer who came to us and said, we want to license this, but SAS is a requirement, we would say, can you help us get these specifications of the hardware? Because if you can help us get the specifications of the hardware, we can put the resources to work to build a driver.
That was one of the problems because the dealer was, I don't know if I should say the name, but it was HP. And HP asked me to classify at that time ECOM as a supported operating system. And of course, I didn't do that because I went to HP and I told them, no, I need drivers for the SAS. Before I speak with the ECOM Serenity Systems, right? It was Serenity Systems.
I know which client that was.
Yeah. So I went to HP.
Yes.
And HP told me, no, we don't develop for OS2, period.
There is an open source SAS driver for Linux now. If we have an open source driver, whether it's for Linux or FreeBSD or some example of the code, then chances are pretty good that we can develop a driver for OS2. I'm not saying port a driver from another operating system. I'm saying if we have an example of how the code is supposed to work, we can develop native OS2 code that will flow through. Roderick.
I just wanted to hook into Bjorn's question about Bluetooth. I'm going to be the guy that's going to spoil the party again. But there's a slight problem with Bluetooth, and it's a bit like USB. It's not just that when you have a USB driver for a Bluetooth controller that can receive and transmit packets, then the rest of the circus comes, because then we need to have Bluetooth audio, a mouse, a keyboard. So the question then becomes, well, what do you want to support?
The Bluetooth, right.
So it's just like with USB. With USB, we've got a base driver that talks to the
general use
and then you have got
for
the other.
Bluetooth today is Bluetooth headphones. Yes. And when we get to the point where we're able to do, for instance, video conferencing, when we have those components in a browser that runs on Arca OS, then we'll have a need for Bluetooth headsets to use with that video conferencing. So it's a chicken and egg, cart before the horse type thing. But yeah, there are several phases to it. You know, what Bluetooth devices do you support? Do you support Bluetooth file transfers? I mean, that's another thing. I'd like to be able to synchronize my phone with my computer. So I want to do that over a Bluetooth connection instead of over Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi I've got to go round robin through the router. Bluetooth is point to point. So yeah, there's more applications for it. But SAS is definitely a possibility. It's on my personal wish list because I'm an HP server guy, and I want to deploy HP servers, and I want to use the SAS array in the server, and I can't right now in Arc OS. The best I can do is switch that controller to SATA mode and run SATA disks in the box. And I'm not a big SATA RAID guy, and we don't really do RAID unless it's hardware level RAID. We don't have a modern RAID driver. So there you have it. More questions? Hardware, software, documentation.
On the Bluetooth side, many of the Bluetooth chips sit on the same small board inside the laptop as the Wi-Fi. So probably you have to support Wi-Fi first to get Bluetooth.
It's an interesting thought. I don't know.
At least you have to address the same chip, or yes, at least the same.
They're on the same board, but I don't know that they're on the same chip necessarily.
Yes, and IBM had a driver for software RAID with a server variant. I think the Warp Server Advanced had an RAID driver for.
Yeah, the driver was on Hobbs for a period of time. It was a software RAID driver.
I thought it was done by a third party called RAID or something like that.
I think that they were engaged by IBM to do the driver.
And I think there was a fault over solution. That was probably another product or another vendor, but I think it was available inside. I think it's more Warp Server Advanced or something like that.
I remember the HPFS 386 feature came with something called
might have been
software.
Did it do RAID 1? Not RAID 0+1, but RAID 1. Mirroring.
I'm pretty sure the feature was described as RAID 1 fault tolerance, but it was implemented as such. Either
Well,
you
could certainly do that. You're just writing identical data to multiple disks. So, No, as we know, the problem with RAID 1 is although you get increased read performance because the data is on multiple devices, you have a slower write performance because there's RAID latency writing to both disks. I'm a RAID guy, so yeah, I'm exactly. but I'm a SCSI RAID guy, and SCSI has gone the way of all things, sadly.
Yeah, well,
As many things, but SAS
token ring.
But SAS is definitely on my personal wish list. So if you have a client who would like that support, please let me know, and I'll bring it to David. David's had his hands full, so I haven't liked to foist favors on him. David, I really would like to look at this server, but I need an SAS driver. Could you drop everything you're doing and spend 6 months doing this driver for me, please? Doesn't really, doesn't really fit with the business model.
Yeah. You have to have a return of investment.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Yep. Absolutely. Roderick, you want to say something? Is that why you came around?
No, well, I know that the lead for which that you're talking about was a Portuguese customer, and it went away a long time ago because they wanted to run Warp Server for e-business on 600 servers.
Yeah, but they still bought some license for Ecom Station, and then there was another one that bought for ArcOS.
Yes.
But the WarpOS at the time.
I know that these were installed OS2 servers that were at different airports that they were managing around the globe.
Yeah.
And those servers have disappeared. They've all been migrated. So.
Well, in that time when it was this the HP thing, is that we didn't support that HP, so they stopped the dealing with HP and bought IBM servers. That's where we got the Ecom Station for that.
Anything else? Anyone? Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much.